The night air in Rome was heavy, clinging to the marble walls of the Palatine Hill. In the palace, torches still burned, but the empress was gone. Messalina, wife of Claudius, mother of 2 imperial children, had slipped past her guards, her silk robes traded for the coarse perfume and painted mask of a prostitute. In the shadows of the Subura, Rome's red light quarter, whispers spread even before she crossed the threshold of the brothel. A queen in disguise. A woman who should have been the model of Roman virtue descending into the filth of the streets. But this was not mere indulgence. It was a contest, a challenge born of hunger and pride. Ancient writers say Messalina faced Rome's most infamous courtesan and wagered her dignity on stamina alone. Which of them could endure more men before the sun rose? Behind closed doors, the brothel filled with groans, laughter, and the clash of bodies. The courtesan faltered at 24. Messalina pressed on one more, then another, until her count reached 25. When dawn broke, the courtesan lay defeated, and the Empress of Rome had won. The story raced through the city like fire. An empress competing with prostitutes, reveling in degradation, winning a crown of shame. Whether the tale was true or twisted by gossip hardly mattered. Rome believed it. Rome wanted to believe it. And history would never let her escape it. For Messalina, this night was not the end. It was the beginning of her legend. A legend carved not from marble or triumphs, but from scandal, one that would shadow every breath she took until her final bloody silence in her mother's garden. Long before her name became a byword for scandal, Messalina was simply a girl born into one of the most dangerous families in Rome. Around the year 20 AD, she opened her eyes not to innocence, but to power. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, the bloodline of Julius Caesar Augustus and Tiberius, was her inheritance. It glittered like gold, but it cut like glass. Her childhood was spent within the palaces of the Palatine Hill, where frescoed walls and marble courtyards masked the constant hum of intrigue. Children of her rank were not shielded from ambition. They were trained in it. Servants whispered secrets in corridors, mothers plotted marriages over banquets, and fathers reminded their daughters that beauty was currency. Obedience was survival. From the beginning, Messalina had both assets, striking beauty and the ability to charm. The poets of the age would later describe her as radiant, though behind that radiance lay the shadow of expectation. A daughter of this dynasty was not raised for her own sake. She was raised as a pawn, a future wife to secure alliances, a vessel to continue the bloodline. Rome itself was her classroom. She watched senators in white togas bicker over law while soldiers clashed in gladiatorial games. She saw how quickly fortunes shifted, how one cousin could be hailed as heir in the morning and executed before nightfall. It was a childhood steeped in both splendor and fear, teaching her the lesson she never forgot in Rome: survival belonged to those who could wield desire as deftly as a dagger. When she turned 18, the dynasty made its move. She was married to a man twice her age, an uncle mocked for his stammer, his limp, his awkwardness. His name was Claudius, and though the world laughed at him, he would soon become emperor. For Messalina, the stage was set. When the marriage was announced, Rome laughed. The beautiful young Messalina, barely 18, was to wed Claudius, a man more than twice her age. He limped when he walked, stammered when he spoke, and had spent much of his life mocked as a fool, hidden from the spotlight of Roman politics. To many, he was the family embarrassment, a relic shuffled through the corridors of power, but never expected to rule. But dynasties do not marry for love. They marry for calculation. And Messalina, as a Julio-Claudian, had bloodlines as valuable as gold. Through her, Claudius could strengthen his ties to the imperial family. Through him, she would gain access to Rome's throne, though neither could have imagined how soon. At first, she played the role expected of her. A dutiful wife, a young bride, smiling politely beside her awkward husband. Quickly, she bore him children, a daughter Octavia, and a son Britannicus. In a dynasty haunted by infertility and sudden deaths, her fertility was a weapon. With heirs in the nursery, Messalina's place was secure. Then came the shock that turned their marriage into an empire. In 41 AD, her cousin Caligula was assassinated, his blood staining the imperial palace. Rome fell into chaos. Soldiers stormed the halls. And in that chaos, Claudius, mocked, overlooked, underestimated, was dragged from hiding and proclaimed emperor. Overnight, the man Rome had ridiculed as a cripple became ruler of the known world. And the teenage bride at his side, she became empress. Messalina's marriage, born of calculation, had transformed into unimaginable power. She was no longer just a girl bound to a husband she barely respected. She was Augusta Queen of Rome, mistress of its palace, mother of its imperial blood. And if Claudius had been underestimated all his life, so had she. Messalina would prove that behind her beauty lay an ambition as sharp as any dagger. When Claudius was dragged trembling from his hiding place and declared Emperor, Rome smirked. Many believed he was a puppet, a weakling propped up by the Praetorian Guard. But if Claudius was underestimated, his young wife was dismissed even more easily. She was seen as nothing more than a pretty girl of fertile womb who had given the empire heirs. No one expected Messalina to rule, and yet she did. At just 20, Messalina understood the dangerous mathematics of the palace. Claudius was vulnerable, which meant she was vulnerable too. To survive, she needed allies. So she aligned herself not with senators, men of old blood and old grudges, but with the emperor's freedmen, men of low birth who owed their power entirely to Claudius. With them, she built a network of loyalty rooted not in tradition, but in survival. But loyalty in Rome was fragile, and enemies multiplied quickly. Messalina learned to wield the deadliest weapons available to an empress: whispers, accusations, and seduction. Rivals found themselves accused of treason, their estates confiscated, their names erased. Julia Livilla, the sister of Caligula, fell under her shadow, banished and dead within months. Valerius Asiaticus, a powerful senator, was accused of conspiring against Claudius and ended his life by suicide. Each victory tightened Messalina's grip. Each downfall reminded Rome that this empress was not a passive ornament, but a predator in silk. In public she smiled. Cradled, her children walked beside her husband. In private, she watched, calculated, and removed obstacles with quiet precision. To Rome's aristocracy, it was humiliating to bow before a girl who had once been dismissed as nothing more than beauty and lust. To Messalina, it was proof that she could bend the empire to her will. The girl of 18 had become Augusta, and soon her appetite for power would spill beyond politics into the very bedchambers of Rome. The palace was not a throne. It was a battlefield. And Messalina learned quickly that power in Rome was not taken with swords, but with whispers. She understood the danger of being underestimated. A young empress could be dismissed as decoration, but she turned that into her weapon. While Claudius busied himself with decrees and rituals, she moved quietly, weaving a web that stretched from the Senate halls to the brothels of the Subura. Every thread she spun was tied to ambition. When she desired a villa, its owner soon found himself accused of treason. Valerius Asiaticus, proud senator and one of Rome's wealthiest men, had a garden that caught her eye. Days later, he was forced to commit suicide, his estate seized, his name erased. Julia Livilla, the sister of Caligula, was accused of adultery and exiled, where death soon followed. To Rome, these were scandals. To Messalina, they were strategies. She did not always need blood. Sometimes seduction was enough. Her beauty was her mask, her charm, her dagger. Men who fell into her bed found themselves bound by more than passion. She used lovers as informants, as pawns, as disposable tools. For Messalina, desire was currency, and she spent it recklessly. The court began to whisper her name with both fear and fascination. Senators resented her power, yet craved her attention. Freedmen owed their rise to her favor, yet feared her wrath. Rome was captivated, scandalized, horrified But above all, Rome watched her. And that was the true danger. For every rival, she eliminated every lover she used, every villa she claimed, her legend grew. Not the legend of a dutiful empress, but of a woman whose appetite for power, for wealth, for bodies, knew no boundary. Messalina had built her empire in shadows, but shadows cannot hide forever. By day, Messalina played the role Rome demanded, the empress in silk, mother of heirs, dutiful wife, walking at Claudius's side. But when night fell, the mask slipped away. Ancient writers whisper of her disappearances, how she slipped from the palace under moonlight robes, exchanged for the rough linen of a common woman, jewels traded for coal and paint. In the narrow alleys of the Subura, where Rome's poor drank and fought in smoke-filled taverns, the empress of the empire became a stranger. There among the brothels, Messalina was no longer Augusta. She was another body for sale. She entered the rooms where soldiers spent their pay, where slaves bought moments of power, where courtesans laughed in shadows. Behind closed doors, she became the courtesan herself, competing with prostitutes for attention, seeking not coin, but something darker and intoxication that even the Palatine could not provide. The stories grow more lurid with each retelling. Some claimed she rented her own private stall in a brothel, returning night after night until exhaustion forced her home at dawn. Others swore she took lovers until the lamps guttered, leaving her body bruised and her spirit insatiable. And then came the tale that ensured her infamy, the contest. Messalina against Rome's most celebrated courtesan, wagering not gold or jewels, but endurance. 24 men left the courtesan broken. Messalina pressed on, one more, then another, until she reached 25. The empress had triumphed not in politics or war, but in a game of flesh. Was it truth or propaganda, sharpened by her enemies? The sources Tacitus, Juvenal, Suetonius cannot agree. But for Rome, truth no longer mattered. The image was enough, an empress who traded her crown for a brothel, a queen who won contests of lust, while her husband governed blind. Messalina's nights in disguise became Rome's dirtiest secret, and the more scandal clung to her name, the more dangerous her hunger became. Rome was no stranger to excess. Its emperors dined until they vomited, drank until they collapsed, and demanded pleasures that bent the boundaries of cruelty itself. Tiberius filled his villas with children, trained for his lust. Caligula staged banquets where guests became victims of his appetite. Nero married men in public ceremonies. These were emperors who turned decadence into ritual, and Rome, shocked, yet submissive, endured it. But when it came to Messalina, the rules changed. She was not emperor, but empress. Not a man, but a woman. And in Rome, women were expected to embody chastity, modesty, the quiet virtues of a household goddess. A man's indulgence could be excused as strength of appetite, proof of his virility. A woman's desire was branded weakness, treachery, even madness. So every rumor about Messalina spread like wildfire. Her brothel disguises her lovers, her whispered contests, they were not merely gossip. They became weapons sharpened by senators who despised her influence, and chroniclers who relished the chance to turn a woman into a monster. Was she truly worse than the men who came before her? Or was she simply easier to vilify? The line blurred as history itself bent to Rome's prejudice. For every man allowed to revel in excess, Messalina became the cautionary tale, the woman who overstepped, who defied, who dared to live with the appetite of an emperor. Her name became synonymous, not with governance or dynasty, but with lust. And that was Rome's greatest punishment. Long before her death, Messalina was already executed in reputation. She was stripped of dignity, not by sword, but by scandal. In the empire that glorified indulgence, Messalina's sin was not what she did. It was that she did it as a woman. For all her lovers, all her nights in disguise, Messalina's most dangerous choice was not in shadows, it was in daylight. His name was Gaius Silius, a senator, wealthy, ambitious, and handsome. Unlike fleeting affairs whispered behind curtains, this one burned openly. Silius was not merely a dalliance, he was a partner. He began walking beside her in public, a presence too bold to ignore. Rumors whispered that he was more a husband to her than Claudius himself. And Messalina, intoxicated by her own power, decided whispers were not enough. She wanted a spectacle. So while Claudius was away at Ostia, supervising grain supplies, Messalina staged a wedding. In the gardens of Rome, with witnesses and rituals, she and Silius were joined in a mock ceremony. The Empress of Rome, still married to the emperor, crowned another man as her husband. To Rome's aristocracy, it was unthinkable. Was this madness a coup in disguise? Some believed Silius aimed to seize the throne using Messalina's hand as his claim. Others thought it a grotesque parody, a display of lust so outrageous it mocked the very empire. Whatever her intention, it was the step too far. Narcissus Claudius's freedman, and one of the few who dared confront the emperor with truth, rushed to Ostia with news. Claudius was stunned, bewildered that his own wife had humiliated him before the Senate, the Guard, and the gods. But Narcissus pressed him. This was not just scandal. It was treason. If Messalina and Silius were not destroyed, Claudius himself might not live to see another dawn. In that moment, the game changed. Messalina, who had danced through scandal after scandal untouched, finally found the one line even Rome could not ignore. She had turned her appetite into rebellion, and rebellion demanded blood. The trap was closing. The wedding with Silius had been a spectacle, but the aftermath was terror. The Praetorian Guard marched through Rome, tearing down the banners, seizing her allies. Silius was dragged into the forum, forced to confess his ambitions before the Senate, then executed without mercy. One by one, the men who had shared her bed or her plots were cut down. Messalina, once the most feared woman in the empire, found herself abandoned. The courtiers who had bowed to her vanished. Her freedmen melted into the shadows. Even her children were silent shields too young to save her. She fled to the gardens of Lucullus, her mother's villa, fragrant with roses, shaded by fountains. But even there, safety could not be found. The guard closed in, carrying the emperor's orders. Her reign was finished. When news reached her that Claudius hesitated, still torn between love, shame, and rage, her courage broke. She begged. She wept. She scribbled frantic letters, pleading with her husband to forgive, to remember their children, to remember the years they had shared. But Narcissus Claudius's ruthless freedman ensured the emperor would never read them. Time had run out. The guard pressed her to do what Romans called honorable, to take her own life, to fall on a dagger and spare herself humiliation. But Messalina could not. The empress who had competed with courtesans, who had mocked senators, who had dared to marry another man in defiance of the empire, trembled when faced with the blade. Her hands shook, her will collapsed, and so the soldier stepped forward. Steel flashed in the sunlight of the garden. The roses drank her blood. Messalina, once Augusta, once feared and envied across the empire, died, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in silence, cut down in her mother's arms, her scandalous life ending in the shadows of the flowers she once adored. Her story should have ended there. But Rome was not finished with her. The roses withered. The blood dried. But Messalina's story refused to die. In the weeks after her execution, Claudius never spoke her name again. Her statues were torn down, her images erased from frescoes, her memory officially condemned. To the empire, she was to be forgotten, stripped of titles, exiled from history itself. Yet Rome could not forget her. The scandal was too delicious, the downfall too spectacular. In taverns, in baths, in whispered Senate debates, her name lingered. Messalina became a story Rome told itself about decadence, lust, and the dangers of a woman who wanted too much. Her children carried the burden of that story. Octavia, her daughter, was married to Nero, a union that ended in misery and execution. Britannicus, her son, poisoned in his youth, eliminated by rivals who feared his claim to the throne. Even in death, Messalina's shadow reached into their lives, cursing them as surely as Rome had cursed her. The historians sharpened her legend. Tacitus painted her as a predator in Silk Juvenal, as the empress of lust Suetonius, as proof that Rome's women could be more dangerous than its men. Was every rumor true? Did she truly sneak into brothels, count lovers like trophies wed Silius in a fever of desire? Perhaps. Perhaps not. But history cared little for truth when scandal was more powerful. And so Messalina endured not as a queen or mother, but as an emblem of vice. For 2,000 years, her name has echoed through literature, whispered in sermons, spat as an insult, remembered less for the empire she bore children to, and more for the empire of appetite she was said to rule. Messalina's fate was sealed not by the blade that ended her life, but by the story that survived it. A story that revealed Rome's greatest hypocrisy. Emperors could drown in excess, but one woman's hunger became unforgivable. Her body fell in the garden. Her legend never did.